Patrick H. Caddell is a political strategist, consultant, and Fox News contributor. Mr. Caddell has served as chief public opinion pollster and senior advisor for the campaigns of Democratic presidential candidates George McGovern and Jimmy Carter. He also served as a personal advisor for President Carter from 1977 to 1981. He has advised over 150 political campaigns, including those of Gary Hart, Walter Mondale, Jerry Brown, Joe Biden, Edward Kennedy, Edmund Muskie, and Mario Cuomo. From 1981 to 1984, he was a member and vice chair of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point by presidential appointment. He has consulted on a number of major motion pictures, including Apocalypse Now, Reds, Air Force One, In the Line of Fire, and Breakout. He was also a writer, producer, and consultant for the Emmy Award-winning NBC series, The West Wing. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Patrick Caddell.
That was a nice introduction. Thank you. There are a couple of things that were left out of my resume. You're looking at the only man who's ever been involved in losing 49 states twice along the way. And I also, when I worked at Coca-Cola, I was involved in the new Coke, which is another story. I could make a movie over. Could really make a movie about that. The fiction is just great. I'm a refugee from politics, and by the way, I have to take this up because this isn't true. I am not from Alexandria, Virginia. I have nothing to do with Washington. I left there in 1987, and they only let me back in when I have a visa. I appear on Fox News, some of you know, on Sunday nights on a show called Political Insiders with Doug Schoen and John LaBoudier, and we have quite an audience. And last night I announced that I was talking about corruption in politics, and I said that 1972 I was the youngest person on Richard Nixon's enemies list, and I was sure this year I was going to qualify as the oldest person on Hillary Clinton's enemies list. So that's quite a distinguished life. Now, I want to say this, by the way. For those of you who were at dinner, I kept thinking, my gosh, look at this whole room full of deplorables. All the adults were in there. And you know, the irredeemables, unredeemables. And then I come here with the students, and I just want to say, seeing the students here, I just want to let them know that you were not left out. Watching the news tonight, and Hillary Clinton is getting a lot of flack because of her attempted appeal to millennials, and then a tape came out where she was discussing young people during the primary, and she called them baristas and kids who live in their basement of their parents' homes, and they don't understand how things work, and the audience of her supporters were going crazy. She said, oh, no, I was sympathizing with them. And to show you her deft touch with young people, she went to the University of New Hampshire because they realized they were not winning young people the way they should. A lot of them were voting for Gary Johnson and Jill Stein, and they didn't particularly care for her all that much. And so she had an event at the University of New Hampshire and brought Bernie Sanders, who can't stop saying enough things. I mean, boy, talk about a guy who took a powder, but to be accepted. But so he's there, and what happened was the room had filled up with his supporters. Students waited 2.5 hours, and almost none of them could get in. And then Hillary Clinton had the audacity to say young people would always have a place at the table with her. So you have to understand why this, and then of course Donald Trump has his own moments where he has been saying things that are just amazing. But I want to talk about this, and I want to start by talking about your college here, Hillsdale. When I was on the phone and was talking with Matt about and he was giving me some background, one of the arguments I'm going to make tonight as I discuss what's happened to my party, the Democratic Party, and the Republican Party, and the country. In 1854, the Whig Party, which had won, a Whig was still sitting in the White House, And then the Whig Party was wiped out in the 1854 election. It was a party trying to straddle North and South on slavery and free territories, and a new party began to arise and started in Ripon, Wisconsin, and had roots in Michigan, called the Republican Party, which was made up of a lot of people who had been free soil people, Whigs, former Whigs in the North, others, and they formed a new party. And that party, and here is the important historical realization, that party in its first election, it was formed in February. In the November of that year, the Republican Party and their allies, their collective set of allies, slaughtered the Democrats and took the House of Representatives in one election cycle. They came within one state. The next 2 years later in the presidential election with John Fremont, who was kind of a wild weirdo. But anyway, and almost won, and the Democrats, Buchanan held out, winning Pennsylvania. But within one cycle, American politics had been turned on its head, and one of the parties that had been the mainstays disappeared, and a new party would end up having dominance for some years. And that was one of the great major changes, along with that of the Civil War, and there are three identifiable major changes in our political history of upheavals. After the Depression in 1932, the emergence of the Democratic Party under Roosevelt as a dominant party in the country, after having been the minority party. And as Professor Hannity said this today, I mean, they had won almost nothing in the 1880s except in 90s, except Grover Cleveland's two interrupted terms and Wilson's term, and then we went back to normalcy for several elections until the stock market fell apart and the country went into deep depression. But the other one was in 1824 and 1828. At that point in 1824, the parties nominated their presidents in caucuses in the House and Senate, the House of Representatives, really. And they would nominate the candidates that were going to run in the parties. And a gentleman named Andrew Jackson, who was an uncouth countryman who believed that democracy meant the people should elect the president and the government. And remember, we had established a system of a republic, but it was an elite-oriented control republic. And, but it was with a generation of people who had won the American Revolution. And those people, the American Revolution, for those who have not studied, and it's a very important thing to really study, because it was a revolution, the great historians will tell you, it was a revolution from the bottom up. It was by the reason we have the Bill of Rights was because there's a great story about this in the first Congress. The only way they could get ratification of the Constitution after it came out of Philadelphia was by the agreement to put in a Bill of Rights. And some of the people who actually opposed this, John Madison, James Madison, who was brilliantly writing the Bill of Rights with the Congress in the first session, that was the deal. And one of the Georgia representatives got up on the floor of the House and said, this was crazy. I mean, he said, somebody's going to come along, if we're not careful, you think you can write all this down, and they're going to say, that's all the rights you have. Now remember, they had just won a revolution. They knew what their rights were. And Madison came back the next morning and said, you know, I've listened to what the distinguished gentleman said, and he was absolutely right. We need a catch-all. And so he introduced what we would know as the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution, 9th Amendment being the amendment that says that, which is apparently nobody's ever remembered. There's a whole complicated reason about the numbering of the amendments. There were originally 13 of them. 3 of them were really weird amendments, and they just didn't go anywhere. But so they were out of order numerically. But the 9th Amendment was to give the people the rights, that they retained rights that were not stated in this document, and essentially natural rights. And I'm a great believer in the 9th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment were giving the states powers that the federal government had not been explicitly given. And we have been fighting about all of this ever since. But in 1824, Andrew Jackson, the victor of the Battle of New Orleans, former governor and senator from Tennessee, and considered a yahoo by most of the political elite in what was then Washington and the East Coast, ran for president against the system that they had in this caucus system against Adams and several other people, and ended up finishing second, but believing that he had in fact been cheated out of the election. And the next election, so John Quincy Adams was elected, and 4 years later, Jackson again decided to run, and he would do this and sweep the country, although every single effort, including smearing his wife and everything else, and he killed people and whatever, to stop him, because he meant that the country meant the people had decided this was going to be a democratic republic. They were going to have the say in who would represent them and lead them. And they were not going to settle for their betters telling them what to do. And I mention this because we are now at a historical moment of great change in the paradigm. And I want to tell just a little bit of the story of how it happened, where the party is today, and follow up on some of the things. But I really need to talk about where we are today, because we are in a moment of a new political paradigm. We are about to see the old rules are being thrown out, the old system, and the country has risen in revolt. The populace of the country has risen in revolt against the political class that did in the economic political class, who have been dominating this country for several decades. And this revolution is real. Now, the mainstream media and the people in Washington, they don't get it. They can't understand what's happened. For those of you who have managed to watch Fox, I've been talking since 2014, the end of the election. I said we are going to have in 2016 the most chaotic political year of our lifetime, including 1968, and hopefully without the violence. But the American people were, I called it, at that time we had entered what I called a pre-revolutionary moment. I'll tell you what it was. I've been doing this project, which I now known as the Candidate Smith Project. It was a deep attitudinal polls, not the kind of light polls that are done with not very many questions or whatever, designed to reflect the results of the people asking, but to really discover. I had some friends who were donors who gave me the money and said, we want you to explore your hypothesis that something's going on. And I did, and my God, what we found. And since then, and I predicted what I predicted the end of 14, and also I said, which was important, that the driving force of this after in December of 2014, after the independents who joined the Republicans to give the Republicans their second massive midterm of victory, when the Speaker, Mr. Boehner, and the Senate Majority Leader, now to be McConnell, went into a back room and came out with the omnibus appropriations bill, in which they gave Barack Obama 100% of everything he wanted. Immigration was fully paid for, Obamacare, what have you. And the Republican rank and file rioted in the country. And I said, they are about the establishment of the Republican Party is in danger of being overthrown. Now, they don't get this. They're still trying to figure out what's happened. And on the Democratic side, this was not a one-sided thing. The idea that a 74-year-old socialist running against the not only presumed nominee of the Democratic Party, but the rigged person who was the entire party was going to be sure was to be coronated, put Hillary Clinton against the wall. And if it had not been for the rigged rules, which I can mention in a minute about the Democratic Party, he would have toppled her. And that is because the country, and a lot of young people joined up, the people who were supposed to be too egotistical and too much into their own things actually joined up. But the interesting thing, as I like to say all from the beginning, is that Sanders and Trump were supping out of the same trough, but from opposite ends. That there was, in a country that's supposed to be entirely divided, we are divided except by one thing. We are divided, we are unified in massive numbers over the fact that this country is no longer the people believe that they rule. And this country, I will tell you, in its genetic memory, is a country where this is the people's government. And they have had enough of being led to failure by a bunch of elites who basically sit around and dictate what it is the American people must do because they tell them. And that includes the mainstream media, which I believe is an extra party here, has basically destroyed, or is in process of undermining the First Amendment. The reason we have freedom of the press was not because the founders liked the press, they hated the press. But the reason was that Jefferson said you cannot have a free government without a free press. So they were the only institution without checks and balances. They would be unencumbered by checks and balances, and a system built on checks and balances, because their job, the implicit bargain of the First Amendment, is they would protect the people from power. They would be the people's tribune. Instead, what they have done in recent years is they have not only deserted their implicit constitutional duty and deserted the ramparts of protecting the Americans from their government, from excesses of power, they have actually joined up and become the outriders of a political class that is so corrupt that the country ranks at, really, if you ask them, no one will mention, it's like the Harry Potter word, whatever that is, Bellador, I can never get it, my grandchildren tell me. Anyway, the point is, the one word not allowed to be spoken in Washington is the word corruption. And yet, if you ask people on a scale of questions to rank them, the number one issue or the number two, it's usually that or one or tied with the economy, has been government ethics and corruption in Washington, ethics and corruption. And then behind that, a couple places is special interest. But let me just say what the big point, and I'll give you some quick alienation numbers, and I'm going to make 5 points. But I had a question that I gave to Scott Rasmussen a few years ago that I wanted to have him ask, and then I picked it up and used it myself, which is, as those of you and the students who have studied, and those adults, remember your Declaration of Independence, which is, this Lincoln said, the sheetrock document of American government. That, but beyond the Constitution, it is the founding document. And it states what the purpose of a people in revolution was. And they said in the third paragraph or fourth paragraph, Jefferson writes in this that the governments derived their legitimate power from the consent of the governed. And when the governed, and he goes on to say, it would not light matter to overthrow it. But the people had not only the right, but the duty to do so if the government no longer represented them. I ask this question, and we ask it regularly, and the question is, we explain in the Declaration of Independence, it says the legitimate role of government is that it derives its authority from the consent of the government, from the governed. Do you think the government in Washington represents the people? 3/4, somewhere between 70 and 75% of the American people say it no longer governs with the consent of the people. That is when I said in 2013, this is the beginning of a pre-revolutionary moment. And it has been followed by a lot of things. And let me just give you a few, because, and then I'm going to talk about the Democratic Party quickly, and then we'll get to, hopefully, the questions. Look, we are not, you hear the polls about 67, 70% of the people say we're on the wrong track. Much bigger than that is a question that I've been asking flat out, which is that America is in a state of decline. 68 before in the past, I've just got new numbers, it's as high as 71% in this October of Americans, an electorate says that this country is in decline. People believe that there are two things that frame this moment we're in a big atmospheric way. Another is the question, the people who believe that were you better off financially than your parents were, than adults. That has now actually turned negative. Before, it's been very positive, people saying they did. But overwhelmingly, people said that the next generation, their children, would not be better off. The basic, fundamental, moral commandment of this republic has been, before it was even a country, was people came here so that they could give their children better than they received. 21, 22 generations of Americans have lived that. It is not a bumper strip. We are now in the process, as Ms. Clinton would have a problem understanding, that we are denying our children and the students in this room and the millennials in this country and my grandchildren and daughter and family, we are denying them their rightful heritage, that they would inherit a better America with more opportunity than we got. Instead, we are devouring their future. And that is a moral issue. And the third big idea is this. We ask people, do you believe the system is, does the system now work where everyone more or less plays by the same rules to get ahead? Or the system is rigged for the well-connected, those with well-connected with money? That is 84% to 10. Believing it is a system with the rich and powerful. Just like there are 3/4 of the American people who, I wonder where they got the notion, believe there's one set of justice for those in power, or the Clintons, and then there's another for you. These are some of the big questions, but I just want to quickly give you a couple that are stunning. And this was the last time I did this, about 6 months ago, and I've got new numbers, and they're the highest ever. Political leaders in America are more interested in protecting their power and privilege than doing what is right for the American people. There was 84, it's up to 89. The power, and this is Democrats, Republicans across the board, independents. This is where Occupy Wall Street meets the Tea Party. The power of ordinary people to control our country is getting weaker every day as political leaders on both sides fight to protect their own power and privilege at the expense of the nation's well-being. We need to restore what we really believe in, real democracy by the people and real free enterprise. And that was 81, it's now in the mid-80s. Powerful interests on Wall Street, banks, the corporations, unions, and political interest groups have used campaign and lobbying money to rig the system for themselves. They are looting the national treasury of billions of dollars at the expense of every man, woman, and child. 75% of the people believe that then. It's almost 90 today. I believe the U.S. government is working in the people's best interest. Well, that didn't go over too well. That's over 70%. Oh, and here's my favorite. Politicians really care about people like me. 18% agree and 76% disagree. And the 18% are what I would say, that is the political class. The country is run by an alliance of incumbent politicians, media pundits, lobbyists, and other powerful moneyed interest groups for their own gain at the expense of the American people. That is 80%, and now it's about 85%. And and a couple of other quick ones. The U.S., the biased and slanted media, coverage of the media and press are a fundamental part of the problem of our political system. 3/4 of the American people, the American media, according to Gallup, has its lowest ratings ever in the last several months, and I wonder why. As people have figured out that they are biased, that they are unfair, and that they have their own agenda. And it's not enough, my problem with the media is this. It is not enough merely that they tell us who we must vote for and who you may not vote for. It is when they decide to tell you what truth you're allowed to know and what truth you are not allowed to know. And that is what they're doing, suppressing information. And thank God for the internet and so many forms of information that we have. The U.S. has a two-track economy where most Americans struggle every day, where good jobs are hard to find, where huge corporations get all the rewards. We need fundamental changes to fix the inequities in our economic system. That's 3/4 or more of the people. A major reason the middle class has not seen their economic condition really improve for decades, and the nation does not have the economic growth it needs, is because corruption and crony capitalism in Washington that puts special interests at the head of the nation. A majority of Americans, almost 80% of the people, agree with that. And here's one that I like. Every week we seem to see more and more news stories about government incompetence and overspending and mismanagement. The federal government is not only dysfunctional, but seems to be collapsing in front of our very eyes. And almost 3/4 of the American people believe that. And here's a killer. and this gets into the parties. The real struggle in America is not between Democrats and Republicans, but between the mainstream America and the political ruling elites. And that is 67 to 24. Believe that. Two-thirds of the American people, mainly in a country we're told there are only Democrats and Republicans. And now remember, we have a country where independents are for the first time the plurality of our country. Both parties are on the verge of being really crushed by this. This election season has been built on a structure done to protect the two parties in power. And whatever differences they seem to have, except, as I said, when they get behind closed doors and start cutting up the pie, and the things that go on, and taking care of themselves and their own interests. It is a facade. This is a Potemkin village of democracy. The American people do not believe they rule, and they do not believe that they are heard. And they meant to be heard this year, and in a system established so it could. And that's how you end up with the Donald Trump being nominated, the most unlikely of all possible people, wins, and Hillary Clinton survives because my party is rigged. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about what's happened to my party, which I describe as a party of memory. Professor Hamby today talked about the legacy of the progressive populist movement in this country, and then with FDR, Truman, JFK, Lyndon Johnson, Jimmy Carter, all the way down about American foreign policy, the movement against them again. And remember, the person who opposed government unions was named Franklin Roosevelt. He said, you can't have them negotiating across the table. We have a civil service system. And he refused to do it. And then John Kennedy just went ahead and signed it one day. And now that those unions, not the labor unions, not the people who work in an industry that the Democratic Party represents, it is a party of government employee unions, particularly teachers' unions. Now, those unions, not the teachers, their job is to make sure we have no educational progress in this country. And what I've seen my party become is a party of interest groups. When we said the original purpose, when Professor Hamby said today, from the beginning of the Democratic Party, was the idea that we would be the party of the people. When 200 years ago, when in 1792, Thomas Jefferson and Madison took a trip, a botanical trip on the Hudson, looking for butterflies, and met up with DeWitt Clinton of New York, and they formed the modern Democratic Party, the oldest political party in the world. And what's interesting is you can begin to see the decline of my party in 1992 at the convention. When Ross Perot, by the way, was at that moment on top, the country was ready to dump the parties then. They were ready for an outsider, but there's a long story with that, but Perot pulled out, and there's a lot of strange quirks going on there that we don't have time for those war stories. I met him on January 3rd, 1992, flew to Dallas, and began discussions with him about making this race. But anyway, but we have now what we have basically are a one-party system, and it's got wings, and we have the corruption party and the stupid party. The corrupt party, and there's a lot of each in both, but you can figure out who is who pretty clearly. But my party has become a corrupt party, and this is amazing to me. It serves, what does it serve? First of all, it moved over in 1992. 1992 convention, Ron Brown, the chairman, it was the 200th anniversary of the Democratic Party. There was no mention of that at the Democratic Convention in 1992. And the second thing they did then was Bob Casey, the governor of Pennsylvania, who was pro-life, was denied the right to speak at a Democratic convention, of which he headed one of the largest states, while they allowed moderate Republican women who were pro-abortion to speak. And that was the beginning of the stifling of dissent in my party, which was supposed to be the party of free expression. And it has now become a party bent on suppressing all facts or truths. And it is now, and that is because it has essentially been hijacked by a coalition of very well-educated, very what I call the swells, the well-educated, money people, whatever, and the interest groups. When in 1992 the Democratic Party became the party of Wall Street. Now, the Republicans were really upset and couldn't wait to try to become the party of Wall Street again. But you know, for a long time, the major funding in the Democratic Party was Wall Street. Hillary Clinton is a walking embodiment. She's raised untold millions from the hedge fund industry and Wall Street and whatever. She gave a speech today saying she was going to be really tough on these banks. And all I wanted Donald Trump to do is, does anybody believe that people give you $100 million or 50, 60 million and want nothing in return? They do it because they like you? That's why her speeches are not public. But it is a party that has lost its soul. And its soul was to represent the common man. It still survives on that, but it doesn't. All you have to do is look at the inner cities of America. And Donald Trump is to be applauded for going to those places, at least raising the banner about what has happened in the inner city. Because the Democratic Party's other interest group is political interest group leaders, and particularly in the minorities where they buy off the politicians. That's what happens. And nothing gets done for the people. Nothing. And we are supposed to be the party that was supposed to take it. The Republicans have a problem, an empathy problem, like they can't talk about blacks and Hispanics in their cities, sorry to say. But Trump goes out there and he says the truth. You're getting killed. Look at your unemployment. Look at the jobs. Look what you don't have. And it is because they can take your vote for granted, which is true, and because the schools, look at the schools. Why? Because the Democratic Party is in the pocket of the teachers' unions. Just like you cannot change the DA because my party has become the party of government unions, and they will not allow anyone to be fired, including people who are responsible for killing thousands of veterans. What kind of country is this? But that is not to say, sadly to say, the Republicans offer a whole lot more. As I said, you know, they promised they would stop Obama. They laid down and died in the streets when he did illegal acts. We have Iran going on. We have the greatest crisis in American foreign policy. Overwhelmingly, the American people oppose the Iran nuclear deal. They got there on their own. 2/3 of them, many Democrats included. And the White House told the Democrats, oh, no, you just vote with us, don't worry about it, and nobody will remember. Well, they do remember. And over almost 75% of the American people say that Iran is not only is either cheating or will cheat on the deal, and that ever since we did this deal, all we've done is surrender. Well, we know what we've done. We put billions of dollars in cash in pallets. We took off secretly sanctions that were supposed to stop them. And what do you hear from the Republicans? Nothing. They do not fight. And we have sailors humiliated on their boats. They built, the Iranian Guard built statues commemorating the American sailors who were put on their knees with guns at their heads. And John Kerry had the audacity to say, well, see, the nuclear deal, we finally got them free because now we can talk to them. Well, by 3-1, Americans think that that was a national humiliation, but not the media. And they will not. These things are not being told. What we have now is this moment in our history when I think the Republican Party has I don't know what it does, because I don't know what it stands for. It certainly doesn't stand for its voters. And they're angry. How dare them do this? I mean, the most rabid anti-Trump stuff comes out of Washington, from places like the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, conservatives, quote conservatives, who feel offended that their power to lose is being taken away, might be taken away from them. Or that the people, because they're really just as contemptuous. And that's the interesting thing. When you ask about the deplorable comments, voters think plurality of them that this is Hillary showing real contempt. By the way, that 18% who said politicians care about them, that's the same percentage of people who say that, when asked about her statement, that she shouldn't have apologized. That's exactly right. That's who these people are. That's the elite in this country. And they have taken this country to the brink of disaster, and the American people know it. Now, and that is why this election is so unclear. We have an election, and it is very frustrating because I believe that the issues and the things that I'm talking about, if Donald Trump had stopped defending the hell anyone cares about his life for, and start speaking for what he promised to be, the spokesman of the American people, the elite are not trying to stop Donald Trump. They're trying to stop the American people from threatening their power. And it is a moment when the country needs to a new breath of democracy. I once said long ago that in the hands of these people, that the spirit, the power of democracy is dead. In the hands of the American people, it is an amazing magic tonic. Nothing the American people have never been able to do when they have been calling the shots. And it is time, I don't care whether, and I think everyone believes this, and if we had an election on that basis, which is this, whose country is this? Who governs America? Whose America does this belong to? Are we going to continue going down the road of decline, or what I call the globalist attitude of, well, we'll make sure it's a soft landing, while we make sure our families and we are all protected and have ripped off everything to make sure we're okay, and we'll make sure it's not too upsetting. And I'll tell you, as I have said before, this country, to paraphrase Dylan Thomas, one of my favorite poets, this is America. This country is not going to go gently in that good night of decline. Faced with decline, the American people will do whatever is necessary to restore what is the exceptionalism in this country. And what we need to first do, and we need to do it for our children and grandchildren, we need to tell the young people it's their country and they deserve better than they're getting, and we're going to do something about it. And that's what the election should be about. And that is what my party is no longer about, as I said, what they have become. And that's why they, as I said, it's a party of memory to me. I refuse to stop believing in what I believe, which is a strong foreign policy. Bill O'Reilly's day said that he wrote all living presidents and asked them whether or not, because he just did a book on killing Japan, or the rising sun, and he said, would they have done what Truman did in dropping the atom bomb? And the two Bushes said yes, and Jimmy Carter said yes. And Bill Clinton didn't answer for obvious reasons. He doesn't want to get in any more trouble. But Barack Obama didn't answer, and we all know the answer to that question. Because he doesn't believe in American exceptionalism. And every president, Democrat or Republican, Bill Clinton, everyone, all believed in American exceptionalism. You cannot lead this country if you do not understand why it is so special and why it became a place made up of people from every place in the world who turned it into a race of people different from anyone from which they had come. And that is the promise of America, and that is what is being lost here. So anyway, that's my take on this, and we can do questions on the campaign or anything else.
Thank you very much for speaking today. I was just wondering, could you elaborate maybe on the steps that you think would be necessary to fix the direction that America is going?
Well, the first thing to do is that the political class, in my opinion, has to be displaced. This has to be turned upside down. Now, I don't know what kind of President Trump would be. My reasons are everyone has to make their own choices in this. But my belief is that we've got big issues on the table. If they're able to win, if they're able to suppress the American people, they will be charged with more power than they've ever had. And they will seek to snuff out, which is what they're doing, choke off the legitimate dissent of the American people to their failures. They have brought this country to this point. And they say, oh, we're so good. You don't think it's a coincidence, do you, that in Washington, this isn't a battle between Democrats and Republicans or liberals and conservatives. It is a battle between the American people and the political class, and they're outriders, and the first thing is they must be defeated. And if Donald Trump would just raise that point, and that they are not trying to stop Trump, although, a lot of people think he should be. They are trying to stop you. They're trying to stop the American people. That's the real threat, or the American people. And that is what this election needs to be decided on. The minute they lose, the world turns upside down. And then I think Trump should do what he promised to do on Apprentice and start and fire these people. You know, let the American people, not him, American people start firing them. People should be, you know what? You fail in any, we are teaching a country that it is okay to fail. We tell our young people, don't worry, you don't have to win. That is, real life is about winning and losing. But it's also about compassion and it's about caring for one another. But for God's sakes, you cannot have a protected class, or as Peggy Noonan calls them, the protected class running riot on the unprotected class, that 18% versus the rest of the country. And this is the first step, because then we need a new generation of new leaders, not people who've been in Washington. They look at this. You have all of these Bush people, these two legacies of the hereditary elite, the Bush people and the Clinton people. And notice how the curtain goes up, and all of a sudden they're all out there on her side. I mean, they're all screaming, oh, no, we can't do this, we can't have, no, my God, that's because they have all been in bed together making this country what it is and working for each other. When you have groups that these consultants, it's easy to discover, when you have all these people in Washington enriching themselves, lobbying the consulting groups, and they have people like, you have Scooter Libby was in business with, the guy who was got Mark Rich's pardons, Jack Quinn, who was, I used to know him as an idealist. Problem with power is power corrupts, and people who stay become corrupt. And these people are in business together. That's the fraud. You can see it right in front of you. But they pretend that they really have battles going on, and it's usually about issues. I'm not saying they're not important, but they are not about whether the country lives or not. So the first thing is we need real Americans to come and do what we had when we had citizen politics. People came to government to serve and go home. And the first thing to do is to make these people leave. Woodrow Wilson, to his credit, when he was inaugurated, in his inauguration speech, told the lobbyists in Washington, which for them were not powerful, but there were enough of them, told them to pack up and leave town, and they did, because they would have no power in his city in the reforms that came. We need to understand, these are the people running the country, and they're the people, and all of these, 70% of the people who leave Congress, they don't go home, they go to work for lobbying companies and lobbyists in Washington. Let me just ask you a simple common sense question. Do you really think when they're sitting there voting and thinking about their future that they're going to hurt the people that they plan to have hire them? Huh? Who do you think they're going to take care of, you or them? And that's why that's got to stop. Barack Obama claimed he was going to stop all this, but like most of what he says, it's a mirage. I mean, the man lives in his own bubble, you know, and I say that as anyone who knows Chicago politics knows, and I have been very steeped in Chicago politics, so I know a lot about it. But he is a man, that is I'm sorry, they say Trump is ego-driven, and he is. But Obama is an ego-obsessed, lives in his own dream world as he decides to make America like the rest of the world. Anyway, next question. I can't see, so stand up or talk or say something.
I'm sorry.
The lights are bright.
I could listen to you for hours.
Well, thank you. I don't think I could, but I'll last as long as I can. I'll stay here till I collapse.
My feeling, I've told people, Trump was never my first pick, but I feel like that if he were elected, it would be the destruction of the Republican Party, and maybe somebody would start fixing the problem that you're talking about. And it sounds like, do you think that if Hillary were elected, anything would change in the Democratic Party?
Let me tell you what my greatest concern is. This is what I said about the enemies list last night. I have to tell you, the most appalling thing as a Democrat is about dissent. During the Vietnam War, Lyndon Johnson was president. They were a very powerful president. And there were people in my party who thought the policy was wrong, who stood up and opposed him, at great potential cost to themselves, the Robert Kennedys and the Bill Fulbrights and others. There's some people who Johnson had controlled for years. Because at that point it was a matter of conscience. During Watergate, as I said, I was the youngest person on Nixon's enemies list, so I have this thing about government corruption and uses of government. And there were Republicans who stood up on conscience and principle, the Lowell Weickers, the Bill Cohens, and others in the Republican Party, because the Constitution of the country, because Nixon had violated those terribly. Today, we have rampant corruption. We have a corrupt machine that's so vast, the Clinton machine. And no, not a single Democrat will stand up on principle and say, we can't do this. They are all, this is the death of my party in the sense of any moral center. It lives because it stokes the fires of identity politics and whatever it does, and divide people and whatever. But she is, let me just say this, no one has said, and what needs to be said, Laura Ingraham hinted this, and I tested, and 70% of people agree with this, 60-some%, I mean, say, if you elect Hillary Clinton and she appoints all the judges and all the prosecutors and all the heads of agency, there will be nobody to stop her. And you know what? The American people know that. If Donald Trump would only say that's the real issue, that Clinton Foundation is the single most corrupt enterprise in American history. It is going to turn this country, if you move that, what they did in the State Department, into the White House. You are talking about turning America into a banana republic and the South American model. Corruption is, look, America can survive incompetence. It can survive periods of stupidity. We have often. But what it cannot survive is the poison of the cancer of corruption, eating away at every element of this, where there are no truths, everything is a lie. Lying is now the currency of the political class. Nobody cares about truth, and nobody cares about saying to the American people, you know why the American people are right to have contempt for what's going on in Washington? Because Bill Grider, a quite leftist but a good friend of mine and a great man, wrote a long time ago in a book called Who Will Tell the People? And he said before the American people had contempt for their government and their leaders first had contempt for them. And that's what I mean when I say that the country, overwhelming majority, believe that Hillary Clinton's comments represent the views of the 60-some% say that is the view of the political class and the media. And they've got it right. Now, what needs to be done is told they don't know nothing. They don't, this country, we've separated in something very bad. Washington is so rich and corrupt. And that's why the suburbs are booming and everyone else is suffering. And they don't see it. They don't live where we live. They don't live where the people live. They do not could send their children to schools, or you send your children to. They don't have to experience anything. They have protected themselves. And they think they have a right. They think that they are some kind of ruling class. This is America. And they need to be overthrown in the way we were taught. We have a constitutional way to do it, and that is what we should use. And if it requires a blunt instrument to do it, then we need the blunt instrument. Because right now it's a question of stopping what I believe is the single greatest threat in my lifetime to the future of this country. And that is the corruption Hillary Clinton lives and believes in and is part of. She, her husband, their donors, all of those people. They took a third of America's uranium supply and gave it to the damn Russians for money. But you don't read this in the press. The new line in the press is, oh, well, she's a crook, but so is Trump. He is nowhere near what she has done. And what they have done to this country, selling favors. Yes, down here we have some people, I think. Oh, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. This is an interesting discussion. One of the things to me that's been left out of discussion is the role of the voter. You're quoting 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85%. We have nowhere near those numbers of people voting, and until the people speak their outrage through their vote, how is it going to change?
Well, that's why we have to have an election where someone will speak for them. And that is my frustration with Donald Trump. His job is not to be about himself, but to be about us. And to tell people that the overwhelming majority of people believe this is the one chance the American people have to take their country back, this election, without any names, to take their country back from the special interest in the political class. And that's close to 70%. And all he's got to do is get up there and say, did this thing in a town meeting, all he's got to say, if you people believe what I'm going to tell you this, if that's what you think, there's only one thing for you to do. It's time for them to go. And it's time for us to take a chance. And better we do that. I am so, it's just like what happened in England with Brexit, when the elites kept saying the world will come to an end, and not only that, will cause it to come to an end if you dare not do what we tell you. And you know what? The British economy, guess what? Is doing well. How about that? And you see these national uprisings where people in other countries in Europe are saying, you mean we're going to take, we're letting these refugees, that's how ISIS is infiltrated. And in Germany, when they've had not pleasant experiences in all of Scandinavia, these people have no idea, the rapes, the violence, all of that, and they've said enough. And Angela Merkel is on her way out. And she is the most powerful woman in the world and the most powerful political leader. The people in the world have had enough of this. It is not about, we can have a global society, but we cannot have a society run by a bunch of globalists who are all in bed together, taking care of one another, who think that their job, that their allegiance is to that creed rather than the responsibility to their own countries. Next.
Mr. Caddell, over here.
Whoop.
Right here.
Ah, there you are, sir. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
I want to hit on something you said earlier. You said that this is a pre-revolutional...
I said that 3 years ago. We are in the middle
okay.
of the revolution.
This is the revolution. Do you believe that this revolution will be one that will break out in violence? And if so, how can we prevent this chaos and violence and still purify our government? Or is it even possible to do one without the other?
Well, no, we don't have to have violence, I believe. I'm deeply against that. I believe what Jefferson said when he said, you know, we have the means to do this if we just believe in ourselves. We have a system where they will not, we can talk to each other, we have the internet, we have other things. The country can come to a consensus. It needs leadership badly. But what I have been warning for some years about, if the continuing ignoring of the rightful dissent and alienation of the American people, would result in, and if this election fails and she gets in and it becomes what I think, the next time may not be very pretty. But we will, the thing I've always worried about, and I worry about today, and I say this to these elitist idiots, is you think you better worry about, you think Donald Trump's wrong, you have no idea. Wait till you get someone, what I call, and I've been talking about this, someone who is the political brilliance of Huey Long, who was the demagogue, I mean, he was really scared to assassinate. Roosevelt was terrified. And that person is, first of all, be a Harvard or Yale graduate. He will be a traitor to his class. He will know how to handle the media from day one because he says this, and his message will be, and he will promise to fix things because we have a problem in the economy, which we're probably headed to in the world or whatever, and none of this is fixed, and all of it is still there. What I worry about is eventually you will get someone, and they may or may not be very good. But I'll tell you, the number that we had the highest in this new poll, and I got it actually from the Quinnipiac people from the spring, and it was about we need a powerful leader who will save us from our problems. That is the definition of the man on horseback. Today, that is 90% of people saying that. Beyond this election, so if we don't want violence, but as I said, the American people are not going to accept, this is in Britain, we are not going down to be a third world country or a reduced country or to lose our exceptionalism without a fight. That is not going to happen. And I'm saying we don't have to have it, but what we have to first of all is state the principles and have this. This needs to be the organizing principle. It needs to be the one for young people because they inherit this country. And those of you, the students here, who have been really screwed. I mean, this is ridiculous. When I was in college, I didn't have to, all I had to worry about when I was in college was getting drafted. But there was no question that when I got out that there'd be a job and I'd have opportunities. And my parents had struggled because they kept the faith. We have not kept the faith, and it is time to start keeping the faith. But it starts with our job as citizens. This is our country. My answer is, if the American people want to just mess this country up, it's their right, it's their country. And if they want to end what is the greatest, as Lincoln said, the last best hope of earth, then so be it on our heads. But let us at least try to live up to what we remember, and if they would teach us something, and that's why what you teach is important to colleges, and why we need to get out of this curriculum stuff in these colleges of, oh my God, I mean, which I could frankly tell you could end it tomorrow, what's happened to these public universities. Under Title IX, you just end it all. But on free speech, whatever, is first of all, we need to understand who we are and where we come from. Because when you know that, you'll know it's in your blood. And I don't care where you came from, whether you came from South America or Africa or whatever. People come here to be free and to prosper. And that if you don't do that as a nation, you think the Balkans is a problem? Look at all of us. Our religions don't unite us. Our ethnicity doesn't unite us. Our class doesn't unite us. Our different class, those things tear us apart. What unites us is an idea. And it is the most powerful idea in the history of man. That people should be no longer pawns pushed around by the royals, but that they should be self-determinative, and that people are given God-given rights, and that these are, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that we stand for these. They mean something.
Hello.
Yep.
I've heard some accuse Trump of being nothing but a self-promoting opportunist. You, on the other hand, seem to see him as maybe the champion of those not in the political class. Do you think it's possible for him to be both?
Well, this country has had its major things. I have an advantage. I've known Trump for many years, and there are many things I can criticize. But his concern about the country is very genuine. He started talking about these things 10 years ago. When he says he was against the Iraq War, I said this to Hannity after the last debate. Not only Hannity, I was in the room with him. I listened to this. He thought it was a dumb exercise, and to go over and get nothing for it was ridiculous. And I mean, I don't agree with him on everything, but his motivations on that, but he is an egomaniac, and he is, anybody. But look, it had to be somebody from the outside. Nobody in this system was going to challenge it. So therefore, you get the vehicle, and as long as he understands what he seems to be trying to grasp, as he tried to do at the convention, that I am your voice, I am your vehicle. And if he would get up and say that, and my flaws are many, but I stand for the people's right to rule, this election would be over in a landslide. So. He ain't the perfect choice. It was not my choice. I wanted to get somebody, tried to find somebody, because I thought it was time for what I didn't have time tonight to talk about candidate Smith, a candidate who could unite a 70, 60% majority of the American people. But this system wouldn't allow that. And you had to have somebody that could self-fund themselves, and who also understood they could get a lot of publicity. Nobody else would have gotten the attention. And none of the other candidates were going to say any of this. What did they all want to do? Let me just go back to the Republican Party for a second, primary for that. He had Marco Rubio on paper look really good. What did he want to do? He was going to be for the three stools of his presidencies, he said. One of them was TPP, and the other one was crawling up as far up a certain orifice of the Republican establishment as he could go. And boy, no one cared to hear about that. Ted Cruz, I've told Ted Cruz 2 years ago, this is not about ideology, it's about insurgency. But he had to run as an ideologue and whatever. And people didn't want it. They sent a message. When evangelicals were voting in the South for Donald Trump, they said, something is more important than social issues to us, it's about the country. And the press and the Republicans can't figure that out. Look who MSNBC and CNN filled their show with. First of all, they filled them with the failed consultants, like Mike Murphy, who ripped off Jeb Bush, and Meg Whitman before that. He's now spent $130 million and got Jeb Bush 3 delegates. And he is the most anti-Trump person. He's been hired as an analyst of NBC News. You would think failing. I mean, that's called failing upward in a way that's beyond me. They also have Rick Tyler. He got fired out of the Cruz campaign, and now he's there to attack. You have Nicole Wallace, a Bushie from the second Bush, 43, and she might as well be. She is. They got so many people on CNN, and that's their view. We'll have 4 liberals, and we'll have 2 Trump-hating Republicans, and that's fair and balanced. Even at Fox, look how hard it's been. I mean, you got voices there. This is not easy to make a message, but Trump had those things, and he needs to use them now for the country. Next, no, I'll take some more. I'll last a little longer if they do. People can leave if they want. You don't have to, no one's obligated to stay.
This year, the Democrats came really close to nominating a socialist. If in the future they manage to successfully bring up a socialist nominee like Bernie Sanders, would that help the Democrats, or would it lead to more disasters like 1972?
Remember what he was saying, except his only problem was with Sanders. I've known Sanders for many years. He's been saying this stuff for 34. No one paid attention. He didn't create this moment. Those voters created this moment. They found him, and at least he was authentic, unlike her. I mean, anyone who thinks she's authentic really must be taking certain kinds of pills or smoking things. I mean, this woman would say anything to anybody. I mean, she's so desperate. And she's repudiated all of the positions of her husband. And then says, oh, we had a great administration, but I'm against all of our things. And when she was for super predators, that was one thing. And when she was taking out women, and I don't think Trump should make those issues. But she's, you know, she is a desperate woman. And sees her role as if I can only get my hands on power. And the people with her, that's all they care about. A lot of people, as I say, with orange hair, trying to get their hands on housing contracts and other things. But no, Bernie Sanders represented a certain authenticity. And what he said about the corruption was real. He just refused to say it about her. And what he should have done, and I have no more, I voted for him, I have no respect for him. I mean, because I knew the Democratic Party was never going to nominate a socialist. Are you kidding? This party is owned by special interests and corporations. They rent the Democratic Party, and they tend to own the Republicans in Washington. And they really, and the fact is, they were never going to allow that to happen. And they made the rules to make sure they didn't. It's a long story of how those things have been rigged. But no, I don't think that's going to happen. It wasn't his policies like that. It was the fact that he was the protest. He was the anti. And at least he seemed to be a man of some conviction. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, you know. And in the Democratic Party, I mean, I don't even a socialist. But he wasn't going to get elected with that. But the point was, that's where he was the vehicle for the revolt. There was no one else. Just as there was no one else other than Trump. And that is a sad system because they did run and nobody else could or would or could put it together.
Thank you for being here tonight. As a first-time voter, I feel like the Republican Party has fallen into reactionary politics rather than principled politics. I fully planned on voting Republican until Trump was the nominee. As such, I plan on voting for the Libertarian Party this year. Many young voters feel the same way I do. We see this is not something that's based on principle, but rather based upon based upon reaction. And we feel that both parties no longer speak for us. How does the Republican Party change to become more appealing to young voters such as myself?
Well, the only way the Republican Party is going to change is when the grassroots cleans out its establishment of the lobbyist consultant class in Washington that are the most, not only corrupt, but they are the most incompetent people. They lost an election in 2012 I didn't think could be lost. They lose all kinds of things I don't think can be lost. It just has to show you, actually, people tend to favor the Republican principles generally more because they win anyway at the local level. I mean, these people are beyond belief. And, you know, the The answer, and I have to say, look, this is an election where everyone has to vote their conscience. Libertarian, I mean, I understand what you're saying. In people, it's hard to vote for, you know, the lesser of two evils is often evil. That's what I learned when I was your age. In 1968, when I was debating whether I could vote for Hubert Humphrey or not against Richard Nixon. And I'll never forget my radical classmate who wouldn't do it. And I was saying, well, I'm going to do it. And he said, no, he said, the lesser of two evils is evil. And you know what? I've thought about that all my life, and it's been kind of true. But this is a special election, and the question is the stakes. And you have to base it on your conscience. If that's how you feel, you should make the protest vote. I would hope that the young liberal millennials would do the same. They're voting for Gary Johnson and Jill Stein. If they feel that way, they should. They don't have to take this. They should protest because they don't have to have this. This isn't their choice. So, you know, do what you think is right and make that decision. Everyone has to make, I've come to this is the first time I said it publicly, I've come to a big decision because you hear what I think the stakes are. Other people disagree with me. People who work with me, they think Trump is a crazy man. And the women who think he's awful, and he can be. But that's why this election is in flux. 1/4 of the American people don't like either candidate. And they are the people, as I said, this ain't about Democrats and Republicans. It's really not about liberals and conservatives so much, because I get in the numbers, it's all very confused. It's those people who have to, and nobody has put the definition on the table. Are we supposed to have a referendum on Donald Trump so that Hillary can be president? Or should Donald Trump get it off his butt and put out a bigger argument and let this be an election about who owns the country? And then we'll have a different result. Because a lot of those people who don't like people believe very strongly in the numbers I'm saying. And that is a message that would help them decide. This is right now is a race to the bottom between these two campaigns, and it's annoying to watch. Okay.
Do you believe that implementing term limits for senators and representatives could help prevent the corruption from the elite class?
I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Do you think that having term limits
term
for
limits?
senators and representatives?
Yeah, well, I think it's time for a lot of them to go. You know, the problem with term limits is that people get in and they don't want to abide by what they agreed. Some of them do, like Tom Coburn, unfortunately, because I have great admiration for him. The doctor who became a senator and fought waste in government, and and was just a great man and is now ill. But you know what? It's time to term limit these people. The advantage they have with money, look, we don't have a democracy when the politicians pick the voters rather than the voters picking the politicians. And that's what we have with all the gerrymandering going on, and it goes on to right down to we have technology we never had before that allows you to go down to the block level and decide which district to put you in or not. And well, that's wrong. And they have unlimited fundraising, and they got all the interest groups. And and I think that I think it would be a very healthy development now. It would deprive us of some people who are great public servants, but frankly, there are not that many I can think of.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.